the visit of Aung San Suu Kyi to Ireland and Britain in June, I suppose, focused attention on Burma, or Myanmar as it's called these days. And certainly interesting things have been happening there. I remember, I suppose about 18 months ago, up on the Thai-Burma border, talking to two women, both of whom had spent years in prison for very minor political offences. They wouldn't be in fact considered offences in this country at all. And that was just before the elections, which took place I think in November of 2010. Now neither of them had any hope whatsoever that the elections would make any difference, because they were extremely well organised elections, to use a nice word. But since then, in fact, interesting things have happened. The new President Thein Sein seems to be a man who does want to bring about some reforms, and very seasoned commentators on Burma actually have written fairly positive articles about what's happening there. Now sometimes, in fact, what's happening there in Burma is presented, I think, much more positively than the situation merits. But there are reasons for that. I think quite a lot of multinational groups would be very keen to get into Burma. The Secretary of ASEAN, the Southeast Asian nations, it's like the EC in this part of the world, he gave a warning recently in Bangkok, and he said, I'd like to say to those people who are now lining up in Bangkok, ready to go into Burma as soon as sanctions are lifted, don't just go in to exploit the possibilities that are there. Burma needs all kinds of things like hospitals, education, development. So he's appealing, don't just go in for commercial reasons. So I think one of the reasons why you get very extremely positive reports from some groups is just so that sanctions will be lifted. But Aung San Suu Kyi, up until now, I think, is against the lifting quickly of sanctions, because she says we must actually see more changes on the ground before that's done. And while changes have been promised, some have taken place on the ground, some have yet to be implemented. Now the new government did actually make peace agreements with several ethnic groups. I think to remember about Burma is that we think of it as one country, but when I was a child I used to think Yugoslavia was one country. In fact, there are many ethnic groups. Now Burma is not as diverse maybe as Yugoslavia was, but there are many different ethnic groups there which all have to be brought in together to make one nation. Now there's a fairly vicious war still taking place in the north of the country, in Kachin State, where the Colombians worked for many years. The Catholic Church there is looking after, I think, in the region of maybe 40,000 refugees at the present time. But things certainly are improving. A little bit more money is being invested in education. Now the base, say 100% increase, still represents a very small percentage, less than 3%, I would say, of the national budget. But some resources are being directed in the right way. There are many more things promised. There is much more freedom. One of the very interesting things that I heard, I still get a lot of information from Burma. One of the bishops in the north told me that in his area, Aung San Suu Kyi's party got something like 96% of the votes. Now, it's important to remember the election victory of her party, the National League for Democracy, doesn't in fact make a very big difference, because they just got something like 47 seats in a 600-seat parliament. But I think what that 96% represents is that people are no longer afraid to vote for her party, which they would have been in the past. So all in all, I would say things are improving, and I'm sure that if I was able to go back up to the border and talk to those two same women, next week, I think both of them would agree that certainly things look much more optimistic than they did 18 months ago.